They should have listened. The warning wasn't subtle. It was a broadcast sent across every known frequency in a dozen galactic tongues, backed by something rare from Earth. A silence that didn't beg. It promised. Do not cross the black line. No empire has returned after doing so. But of course, they laughed. The Imperial Senate, drunk on centuries of expansion, called Earth a primitive dirtball, hidden at the edge of an abandoned spiral. The Council of Lords debated the warning for less than 2 minutes before voting to advance the fleet. After all, who were these humans to make demands? A new species, barely 200 years into interstellar flight, claiming territory as if they'd earned it. But the line wasn't for show. It had been etched in real space, a boundary of scorched moons and blackened stations, each one a tombstone for those who didn't listen. Still, the Empire, with all its arrogance, crossed anyway, and that's where things began to unravel. The First Fleet, 30 ships, slipped across the line, headed for the Orion Gate cluster. Scouts were dispatched. Reports came in fine. Quiet sector, no hostiles, no resistance. Then, silence. Not interference, not distortion, just nothing. Command assumed equipment failure, so they sent reinforcements. 80 warships, gone, not destroyed, not burned, just erased. No wreckage, no escape pods, no trace. That's when panic cracked the Senate's glass floor for the first time in 3 centuries. They ordered a full strategic mobilization, activating dreadnoughts that hadn't seen light since the Tartari Rebellion. Propaganda screens stopped mocking Earth. Instead, they called for urgent diplomatic contact. But no message from the Empire reached the humans. Not anymore, because Earth had heard enough. A month later, Earth broke its silence. They didn't send a war declaration. They sent a single encrypted file to the Empire's high command. It was a video. In it, a man stood alone in what looked like a ruined cathedral. Behind him, flickering blue lights floated like spirits. His voice was calm, but each word carried weight, like someone used to violence who didn't need to raise his tone anymore. You took, you burned, you enslaved, and when we told you to stop, you sent more fleets. He paused, then leaned slightly forward. Now you'll learn what happens when the last peaceful species finally stops being peaceful. No name. No rank, no threats, just that. The Empire tried to respond, but by then, it was too late. The human fleet didn't arrive with fanfare. There were no parades of lights, no symphony of drums. They came like a ghost story, one ship at a time, slipping into core space, disabling satellites, cracking relays, and leaving behind eerie silence. By the time the Empire realized humans had reached Sector 3, their equivalent of Earth's home front, the entire sector had gone dark. And then, something worse happened. The Empire discovered their own ships had been turned against them. Entire Imperial cruisers were hacked mid-flight, rerouted, and sent crashing into their own fuel stations. Artificial moons began falling from orbit. Drone workers, harmless civilian units, started building weapons they weren't designed to understand. Humans didn't conquer with brute force. They rewrote the rules of war. The last thing Admiral Serix remembered before losing control of his dreadnought was a whisper over the intercom in that same calm voice. We offered mercy. You wanted war. Then black. No fire, no explosion, just black. The Empire called it a massacre. Earth called it justice. The collapse didn't happen all at once. Empires, despite their arrogance, don't fall in a single day. They rot from the inside first, a rot masked by gold-plated statues and perfect uniforms. But when the walls begin to crack, everything that had been ignored, fear, doubt, failure, pours out. The human attack wasn't just a physical strike. It was psychological. In the early days of the conflict, the Empire still clung to its image of superiority. They told the outer colonies that this was a containable skirmish. They assured the noble houses that the human technology was primitive, unpredictable, and likely stolen. They said Earth had no central leadership, no coherent military doctrine. A fractured planet, once at war with itself, could not possibly be the architect of such precision. But behind closed doors, the High Command had no answers. Fleet Admiral Rythan had personally reviewed the wreckage of the Netherian-class cruiser Devastation, one of their top-tier warships. Its hull had been turned inside out, not breached, not pierced, folded. A kind of spatial manipulation the Empire had only theorized in restricted academic labs. He'd stared at the remains for hours, unable to speak, while his aides whispered about gravitational stress points that didn't match any known weapon. No energy residue, no shrapnel, just a perfect, silent kill. And Earth didn't stop. Every week, another sector went dark. Not bombed, not conquered, just disconnected. Long-range communication relays, gone. Supply routes, jammed. Drones rerouted by unknown AI signatures. It was as if Earth had crawled into the very nervous system of the Empire and begun severing nerves one by one. The first to break were the outer colonies. They had never been loyal, just afraid. Once the Empire's grip faltered, systems began defecting. Not to Earth, but to themselves. Local warlords, long suppressed by the iron boot of the core, rose like weeds after the rain. They declared independence with the confidence of those who knew the Empire was dying and couldn't stop them. Back on Earth, nothing was said publicly. No press conferences, no gloating, no celebrations. Because Earth didn't need approval anymore. Humanity had learned something no other species had. The most terrifying enemy is the one that doesn't gloat when it wins. They just move on. The Empire scrambled to understand how it had come to this. Secret task forces were assembled to investigate Earth's rise. What they found wasn't just disturbing, it was impossible. According to Imperial intelligence, humanity should have been 50 years behind in every metric: energy weapons, faster-than-light drives, AI processing, terraforming. But reports from surviving outposts painted a different picture. Human ships didn't use jump gates. They tore through space. Their soldiers weren't augmented with implants. They were implants, symbiotic tech, bonded at birth, indistinguishable from their biology. A fusion of flesh and machine that reacted faster than anything the Empire had ever built. And then there was the worst part. Humans didn't fight like the Empire. They didn't form ranks. They didn't march. They didn't follow doctrine. They adapted. Every time the Empire tried something new, Earth responded faster than the next order could be given. It was like they wanted to be tested. In one infamous encounter, an Imperial scout fleet bombed what they thought was a hidden human base on the dead moon Virexa. The base turned out to be empty. But the bombers were tracked, not by satellites, not by ships, but by particles in the wake of their engines. Particles humans had somehow used to program a counterattack into the atmosphere of a nearby gas giant. 3 days later, as the bombers passed near the planet's orbit, the magnetic field of the gas giant erupted unnaturally, and the entire fleet was vaporized by what the survivors later described as a man-made solar flare. And still, Earth said nothing. The Empire's desperation bled into their leadership. Political infighting turned violent. Entire ministries collapsed under the weight of their own corruption. The noble houses, once united in conquest, began plotting against each other, hoping to trade humanity's wrath for personal survival. On the 99th day since the border was crossed, something happened that changed everything. A human envoy arrived in the core. No ships. No invasion, Just a single transmission. Untraceable, unblockable. It hijacked every screen, every terminal, every implant. The same man as before appeared. Calm, cold-eyed, human. But this time he wasn't alone. Behind him stood thousands, not soldiers, civilians, ordinary people, children, elders, engineers, miners, farmers, all staring, silent, with expressions that said more than any speech could. The man spoke. "You were warned not because we feared you, but because we pitied you. You build empires with blood and chains. We build legacies with memory and will. You crossed our line. Now we'll cross yours." And then the screen cut to black. Every high-ranking member of the Senate received a second file. Privately. A map. It wasn't of the core. It wasn't of Earth. It was a schematic of the Imperial Palace. Down to the secret chambers no one should have known existed. The message below was chilling in its simplicity. "We've already been here." Panic took hold like wildfire. Suddenly, no one trusted their own technology. Communications were shut down. Ships were grounded. Systems went dark by order. Entire branches of the military dissolved themselves, afraid they'd already been compromised. And they were right. Human infiltration wasn't theoretical. It had been happening for years. Slow, silent, patient. Earth hadn't just prepared for war. They had studied the Empire. They knew its weak points, its blind spots, its addictions. They understood that brute force wasn't the key. Rot them from the inside. Let the Empire destroy itself. And it was working. In the deepest prison sectors, political prisoners, some forgotten for decades, were suddenly released by phantom systems no one claimed to have access to. Food shipments went missing. AI assistants turned suicidal. Medical bots reprogrammed themselves to lie about patient vitals. The Empire's most advanced systems were now working against their masters. And Earth never fired a single planetary bomb. Why would they? Fear was doing the job. In the shadows of a dying empire, a final meeting was called. 6 remaining lords, all from different sectors, convened in a sealed chamber buried 5 miles below the imperial capital. No screens, no implants, no machines, just words. They debated surrender, appeasement, bribery, even retaliation. But nothing made sense anymore, because none of them could say, with certainty, that Earth hadn't already infiltrated the chamber. "What if we're already lost?" one of them whispered. And in that silence, they all understood. This wasn't a war. It was an execution. They hadn't poked a sleeping animal. They had woken something older, something patient, something that had crawled from extinction more times than any species had the right to, something that had survived its own self-destruction, rebuilt its world, and looked to the stars not with hope, but with memory. Humanity had not been born in peace. It had been forged in chaos, and now that chaos had returned, refined, controlled, directed. One of the lords, shaking from age or fear, finally stood. "Then let us beg," he said, but there was no one left to hear. Back on Earth, things were quiet. Children played under artificial skies. Farmers harvested clean crops from Martian soil. Artists painted with AI that read their dreams. There were no parades, no war songs, no statues. Because for humans, this wasn't a triumph. It was a reminder of who they had been, of how far they'd fallen before, and of what it cost to rise. The man from the videos walked alone through a small village where the sun always seemed to set just right. He was not famous. He didn't have a title. But everyone nodded as he passed, not out of fear, but respect. He stopped by a stream and sat, watching the water. A child approached him, curious, untouched by the weight of war. "Did we win?" she asked. He looked at her, then at the stream again. No, he said. We reminded them what losing feels like. There was no clear date when the Empire officially fell. No treaties were signed, no surrender declared, no flags lowered. It was more like watching a star flicker out, one burst at a time, until there was nothing left but darkness and memory. And fear. By the third month since Earth's retaliation began, fear wasn't just inside the Empire. It was the Empire. Entire systems had gone silent, not because of attack, but because of paranoia. Commanders shut down their own networks to avoid being hacked. Civilian cities powered down out of terror their grids had been infiltrated. Ships stopped accepting orders unless they came in person. The flow of information broke down completely. Mistrust became the most efficient weapon Earth never had to build. The Outer Ring declared independence. The mid-colonies started aligning with old pirate clans they once hunted. Even parts of the core, proud, polished, rich, were on the verge of rebellion. And Earth didn't move a muscle, because the damage had already been done. The Empire wasn't at war with Earth anymore. It was at war with itself. In a heavily fortified station orbiting one of the few remaining loyal planets, a general named Tyron paced in silence. He was no fool. Unlike the rest of the High Command, Tyron didn't drink the syrup of denial they all seemed addicted to. He wasn't born into power. He'd climbed it, one bloody rung at a time. He didn't like Earth. He didn't understand Earth. But he respected Earth. And what scared him the most wasn't the technology. It was the restraint. In the past, when other species rebelled, they attacked the Empire like a cornered animal, lashing out blindly, wildly, desperate to inflict damage before being crushed. But Earth was surgical. They didn't conquer planets. They isolated them. They didn't destroy ships. They turned them. They didn't broadcast victories. They let rumors do the work. That's what chilled Tyron to the bone. Earth wasn't just fighting for survival. They were teaching a lesson, and the galaxy was paying attention. He looked out the viewport at the fleet stationed above the planet. Hundreds of ships still gleamed proudly under the system's twin suns. On paper, it was enough firepower to destroy a solar system. But Tyron knew better. He'd seen the reports. He'd read the transcripts. Ships that shot at Earth's vessels had their targeting systems inverted. Drone bays refused to open. Crew members suddenly found themselves locked in their own quarters by doors that shouldn't have had security codes. And then came the disappearances. Officers, captains, entire bridge crews, gone. No bodies, no signs of conflict, no escape pod logs, just empty chairs and blinking lights. It was like Earth had found a way to erase people like they were names on a list. And that's when he made his decision. Tyron turned away from the window and opened a secure, air-gapped terminal. No one could trace it. No signal, no connection, no implants allowed. He typed slowly, with hands that hadn't trembled in years. 2. Unknown human command. Subject: proposal for dialogue. He didn't beg. He didn't whimper, just a short message. I believe not all of us deserve what's coming. I request a conversation, face to face, unarmed. I'm not here to stop you, just to understand. You already know where I am. He sent it, and waited. Not for hours, not for days, for minutes. His terminal blinked once. Then again. And then a line of text appeared on the screen, glowing in pale blue. We'll meet you in your memory. Tyron had no idea what that meant, until the lights dimmed. When he woke, he wasn't on the station anymore. He was standing in a place he hadn't seen since childhood. The broken street where his father died during a rebellion, back when the Empire still crushed dissent with orbital fire. Except this version of the street was wrong. It was clearer. Cleaner. Like someone had reconstructed it from memory and added details no one could have remembered. The way the light hit the corner of the bricks, the specific scuff marks on the door, the smell of oil and old rain. And standing at the far end of the street was a figure, a human, the same man who'd appeared on screens, the one who never gave his name, never wore rank. Just simple black clothes and tired eyes that had seen too much. "You're inside my head," Tyron said aloud. "No," the man replied. "You're inside yours. We just know the way around it better than you." Tyron didn't flinch. "Why are you doing this?" The man took a step forward. "Why did you ignore the warning?" Tyron didn't answer. The human stepped closer. "Why did you let your people cross that line when we told you what would happen?" Still no answer. The man's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "We weren't threatening you. We were trying to save you." Tyron frowned. "From what?" "From us." The next few minutes, or hours, he couldn't tell, were a blur of memory and revelation. The human showed him things. Not battles, not losses, origins, Earth's history, unfiltered. Not the version the Empire taught, barbaric tribes and endless wars, but the truth. Civilizations that burned and rose again, a species that had nearly killed itself a dozen times, yet always came back sharper. Tyron saw what the Empire never believed, that humanity had once turned its own sun into a weapon, that it had once fought wars inside time itself, that it had designed gods, synthetic and real, and then destroyed them when they got too close to control. And then humanity stopped, because it realized something worse than extinction, becoming like the Empire. That's when they retreated, rebuilt, disappeared from galactic affairs, not because they couldn't keep up, but because they knew what they were capable of. And when the Empire crossed the border, it wasn't a declaration of war. It was a mistake, a fatal one. Back on the station, Tyron woke up gasping. There were no wounds, no scars, but something inside him was cracked. He saw his officers differently now, his fleet, his people, himself. Because now he understood something the Empire had refused to learn. Earth didn't hate them, they pitied them. And that's why they were dangerous. Because they were choosing not to kill. And one day, they might stop choosing. Elsewhere, on the Empire's former capital world, the heart of its glory, things were no longer glorious. The city's central AI had stopped responding. Traffic systems failed. Sanitation collapsed. But most terrifying of all, the statues had changed. Sometime during the night, without anyone seeing, every imperial monument had been replaced. Not destroyed, not defaced, replaced. The same shapes, the same poses, but the faces were different. They were human, smiling, calm, watching. The people woke up to a world that no longer belonged to them. Panic turned to hysteria. Rumors spread that Earth had found a way to rewrite physical matter, to overwrite reality itself. And no one could say for sure if it was true, because by now no one trusted anything they saw. And still, Earth said nothing. No ambassadors, no demands, no treaties. They let the silence do what their weapons didn't need to. Until, on the 120th day since the line was crossed, a signal pulsed through the heart of the Empire. A new message, short, final, broadcast on every channel. "We remember everything. You've forgotten enough. This is not revenge. This is prevention. We are the last warning you'll ever get." And then, silence. In one final act of blind desperation, the last loyal sector of the Empire launched a retaliatory strike, a fleet of 400 ships, the most elite in their history. They jumped past the border, targeting Earth's moon bases, orbital stations, shipyards. They never arrived. Their final transmission was a voice, distorted, half-static, barely audible. But the words were clear. "It's not the weapons that scared us. It's what's behind them." Then nothing. No more fleets came. No more orders were given. The Empire was over. And Earth? Earth just kept moving forward. Not in celebration, but in silence. Because this was never about war. It was about remembrance of who they were, of what they could become, of what happens to those who ignore the last warning. No one had seen Earth in over a year. Not directly. The planet had vanished from every major star map. Not cloaked, removed. Even the Empire's deepest telescopic arrays, the long-range graviton sensors from the Chelov system, and the time-bending filters used to spy on pre-space civilizations, none of them could lock eyes on Earth anymore. It hadn't moved, but it no longer wished to be seen. And just like that, humanity became a ghost. Not gone, not destroyed, just watching, waiting. The Empire had stopped sending fleets long ago. There were no more orders from High Command. Because there was no High Command. The governing structures had melted down into warlordism, or fractured aristocracies desperately clinging to fading symbols of power. Systems turned on one another like animals once the leash was cut. Meanwhile, Earth didn't claim territory, didn't fly flags, didn't broadcast their victories. They simply removed obstacles. And the rest of the galaxy was starting to understand. This wasn't a war, it was a purge. But while the Empire drowned in its own fear, on Earth itself, something else was happening. Not celebration, not unity, silence. Cities ran smoothly, artificial skies shone across megadomes, oceans were clean, crops rotated by sentient soil. There were no riots, no unrest, no hunger, not because of force, but because everything was being directed. By something bigger than any one government. Not a leader, not a regime, but a conscience. It had started decades ago, after Earth's last internal war, a war so devastating that parts of the planet had to be rewritten molecule by molecule. Humanity realized that survival wasn't about dominating others anymore. It was about controlling themselves. So they created the memory engine. It wasn't AI in the traditional sense. It wasn't designed to lead or rule or judge. It was designed to remember every atrocity, every genocide, every betrayal, every failed system. It cataloged all of it and encoded it into every layer of Earth's governance. No human would ever be allowed to forget again. Not the mistakes, not the cost. And the result? A civilization that advanced through shame instead of pride. One that saw expansion not as ambition, but as a liability. Earth's rise didn't come from conquest. It came from restraint. And that restraint is what scared the Empire the most, because they couldn't understand it. But the humans knew that peace wasn't a default state. It was a leash. And if the leash ever broke, the galaxy would learn what humans had done to themselves before they ever pointed a weapon outward. In the orbit above what remained of the Imperial capital, a small vessel appeared. It wasn't large, no shields, no visible weapons, not even any crew, at least none that could be scanned. It drifted calmly, then entered atmosphere. Across the city, or what was left of it, people watched in paralyzed silence as the craft hovered silently over the ruins of the Senate Dome. It didn't speak. It didn't land. It just opened. From within, something emerged. But not a man, not a drone, not a machine. It was a memory. Projected, holographic, but with depth and weight that bent the light around it. It showed them. The day they invaded the border, the arrogant speeches, the votes of dismissal, the mocking jokes about Earth. And then, one by one, the projection replayed every consequence, every death, every collapse. Every system Earth had dismantled, not with missiles, but with understanding. And at the end of it all, one line appeared on every screen in the city. You don't defeat a species by making them afraid. You defeat them by making them ashamed. Then the vessel vanished. In the wastelands outside what used to be the Empire's most elite military academy, 2 scavengers picked through the ruins. They were young. Too young to remember the glory days. All they knew were the stories of power and the quiet, all-consuming terror of the present. They didn't speak often. Too dangerous. The ruins were full of motion-activated systems gone haywire. Some still mistook children for enemies. Some had been reprogrammed to do so. But that day, something was different. One of the scavengers, a girl with a rusted patch over one eye, found a cracked console deep beneath the rubble. It was blinking, still functioning. She tapped it, and a voice spoke, human, not hostile, not loud, calm, tired. Are you ready to listen now? The girl froze, then slowly nodded. A second later she collapsed, but her mind didn't go black. It went inward. She saw things, not visions, not dreams, memories, but not hers. They belonged to Earth. The first wars over clean water, the great burning of the skies, the civil schisms that turned continents into graves, the floating cities that rose and fell again, the AI rebellion that never made it into Empire history books because Earth deleted every trace of it. After it won, she felt the pain of being human, the weight of centuries of guilt, regret, survival, reinvention, and then a peace that wasn't won with victory, but with surrender to humility. She woke hours later, gasping, and looked at her partner. He was watching her like she was someone else now. "What happened?" he asked. She looked at the wreckage around her, then back to the blinking console. "They're not monsters," she whispered. "They're survivors." He frowned. "So we can fight them?" She shook her head. "No," she said. "We become them, or we end." The message spread faster than any ship ever had, not because of tech, but because it resonated. Across dying systems, across fractured colonies and scavenger tribes, the truth seeded itself like a virus, not of destruction, but of introspection. Some laughed it off, some resisted. But deep down, even the proudest warlords began to feel it. The shame, not of losing to Earth, but of never trying to be better than they were. That was Earth's real weapon. Not ships, not soldiers, not AI, history. And they wielded it like a blade sharper than anything the Empire ever forged. Elsewhere, in deep orbit, a surviving Empire officer stared at the planet that once ruled them all. It was rotting now, covered in pollution, storms, blackouts. Its moon had been cracked, its oceans boiled. He sat alone in a broken observation ring, watching static dance across old screens. But on the 7th hour of his vigil, one of them flickered, just for a second, and a line appeared, just one. "Your children will remember us better than you ever could." Then nothing. He didn't weep, didn't rage. He just stood and walked into the vacuum, because some truths are too heavy to carry back. Back on Earth, a council met for the first time in months, not to declare war, not to issue commands, but to debate a question: have we done enough? Some argued, yes, let the remnants of the Empire rot, let shame do its work. Others weren't so sure. What if shame wasn't enough? What if they, like Earth once did, used their pain to grow harder, not wiser? What if silence had only bought time? But then, the oldest among them, a woman who had watched 10 governments rise and fall before the current one, said something no one expected. "They won't learn from what we've done. They'll learn from what we don't do next." And with that, The final phase began. Not attack, not conquest, but vanishing. Earth, piece by piece, began to disappear from the galaxy again. Their ships withdrew from shadowed orbits. Their signals stopped answering. Their presence, once a haunting specter over every world, faded like mist in morning light. And the message was clear. We're done warning you. What you do next is your story. No domination, no reward, just silence. And a question that would echo across the galaxy for generations. What if we are the monsters, and they're the proof we don't have to be? There was no final broadcast from Earth, no farewell speech, no monument left behind, no final act of dominance. They just stopped being there. One by one, their ships faded from sensors. Outposts went offline, seemingly by choice. Wormholes that once trembled with their silent jumps lay still. By the 160th day, there was no trace of human presence in any quadrant beyond the line. Some claimed Earth had ascended. Others said it had sealed itself off, building a barrier the galaxy wasn't ready to understand. One rumor suggested they had folded space around their solar system like paper, locking it into a pocket dimension visible only to those they chose to remember. But no one truly knew, because no one dared to look again. Even mentioning Earth's name in some systems became taboo, not out of hate, but out of dread. The way people avoid saying the name of a god that punished, not saved. And yet the silence did not bring peace, it brought echoes. In the abandoned mid-ring system of Zarn, an independent scholar named Rylun sat in the ruins of what used to be an Imperial communications array. She'd spent the last 6 months collecting fragments of human transmissions, scattered like broken glass across the stars. They were never full messages, just pieces. Snippets of speech, distorted visuals, packets of code no one could decipher. And always, that same presence behind the data, as if each byte carried with it the emotional residue of something watching from behind a curtain. She'd come across the first fragment by accident, a half-corrupted data log from a scavenger drone near the wreck of an old Empire warship. It was only 7 seconds long, a blurry visual, a voice that didn't match the distortion pattern. It had said, "Do not fear us. Fear what made us need to be this way." Rylun had played that clip every night since. She didn't know why. Maybe because, in those 7 seconds, it had said everything she'd never been taught. The Empire had raised her to believe strength meant breaking others before they could break you. That progress was the inheritance of the cruel. But Earth had proved otherwise. They hadn't killed the Empire with bombs. They'd broken it with self-reflection. They'd made power look ugly, and that terrified people more than any weapon. Soon, Rylun wasn't the only one listening. A new movement began to rise. Not a rebellion, not a government, just an idea. They called themselves the Echo Children. They weren't aligned to any species. Most had never met a human. Some weren't even born when the Empire fell. But they all believed the same thing. Humanity hadn't disappeared. They had simply chosen to watch. The Echo Children weren't trying to resurrect Earth's weapons. That wasn't their goal. They were obsessed with understanding why humanity had done what they did, not how. Their founding belief that the true weapon of humanity wasn't tech or AI or warcraft. It was memory. And memory could be replicated, preserved, reconstructed. Some species mocked them, some feared them, some outlawed their teachings entirely, but their numbers grew. And in the dead worlds where Earth had passed through, they began leaving markers, not warnings, but reminders, gravestones, murals, engraved metal tablets with quotes from intercepted human broadcasts, each one a message to the future. The line was not a wall, it was a mirror. They did not destroy the Empire. The empire collapsed when it saw itself. Shame is not weakness. It is your final chance. Not everyone reacted with reverence. Some wanted revenge. In the fractured remnants of the outer core, a former Empire intelligence director named Solmir had begun building what he called the Correction Fleet. He hated Earth not for what they did, but for how they did it. To him, humanity hadn't defeated the Empire. They had humiliated it, turned it inward, made it look at its own filth and feel it, and that, to Solmir, was an unforgivable violation. He didn't want peace. He wanted purity, restoration, a galaxy with no human fingerprints left on it. He gathered those who felt the same. Former nobles, disgraced warlords, fallen admirals. He promised them a new path, one where fear was met with fire, not apology, and his fleet began testing ancient weapons lost during the human silence. Not Earth tech. Empire tech. Designs once considered too dangerous to ever build. The kind of weapons meant not just to destroy bodies, but to erase histories. If Earth had used memory to win, Solmir would use forgetting to fight back. But what he didn't understand, what none of them did, was that Earth hadn't left out of fear of retribution. They'd left because they'd said enough. And if provoked again, they wouldn't just return to teach a lesson, they'd erase the entire classroom. Meanwhile, deep in the drowned archives beneath Europa's ice, a small AI cluster finally decoded a hidden string embedded in a signal from over a year ago, one of Earth's last transmissions. It wasn't in any known language. It was layered across 12 different frequencies, using harmonic pulses tied to biological stress markers. The AI only managed to decrypt it by mistake, when one of its researchers died of a heart attack near the data relay, and the pulse of his final breath matched a buried harmonic. The message? We survived ourselves. That's how you know we can survive you. It was signed by no one, but the AI recorded the emotional resonance in the data, what humans might call grief. Across the galaxy, a slow shift began. A new political axis formed, not from power, but from fear-wrapped respect. Some species rewrote their histories, others installed shrines to the line as a reminder of the boundaries not to cross. A few even programmed their children's education to include a single mandatory module: the Human Collapse event. They never called it a war, because it wasn't. It was an intervention. And the aftershocks were still felt in systems where humans had never even stepped. It changed the way colonies were governed. It changed the way peace was negotiated. No one wanted to become the next empire, because they knew Earth was still out there. And if they ever came back, it wouldn't be to talk. In the quietest corners of space, near dead suns and forgotten moons, one last Earthship waited. It wasn't manned. Not anymore. Its systems had long since shut down, its engines cold. But inside its sealed core was a chamber, not of weapons or blueprints or navigation charts, but a library, not books, not data drives, not holograms, memories, billions of them, of pain, of joy, of ruin and rebirth. The life of a species, condensed into sensory experiences that could be felt directly by anyone who dared step inside. It was the last gift Earth had left behind, and it would only open if someone came not with questions, but with the courage to remember. They named themselves the Velari, a species not known for war nor conquest. In the Empire's time, they were archivists, historians, language keepers, always pushed aside by louder, stronger powers. They remembered everything, but were rarely listened to. Until now. Of all the species left drifting in the ruins of the Empire, it was the Velari who chose to do what no one else dared. They would cross the line, not as invaders, not even as equals, but as students. The Valari had studied every remnant of the human silence, every echo child artifact, every intercepted fragment, rumor, and whispered phrase. They had collected the monuments Earth left behind like sacred scripture. They debated every word, translated human emotional context into color-coded dialects, reconstructed timelines with obsessive precision. To them, humanity was not just a species, it was a myth given form, a warning wrapped in mourning. The line wasn't just a territorial boundary, it was a scar, a reminder that something powerful enough to break an empire chose not to finish it off, and the Valari needed to know why. So they sent a ship. The vessel was called Amriel, which in Valari language meant Seeker of Shadows. It wasn't a warship. It barely qualified as a deep space cruiser. It carried no weapons, only energy deflectors, and a single AI core. Its name was Tesserin, and it had been designed to process contradiction, ambiguity, and silence. The crew, 12 souls. Young, but not inexperienced. Chosen not for strength, but for clarity of thought. Scholars, empaths, a diplomat, and one pilot, a quiet figure named Talon, whose name meant child of unspoken questions. When they approached the line, they expected to be stopped, expected warnings, expected something, anything, to mark the infamous border. But there was nothing. No debris, no defense systems, no ghost fleets. Only the strange absence of stars, light bent unnaturally around an invisible perimeter. The void curved there, not because of gravity, because of something more intentional. Talon held his breath. "Are we in?" Tesserin, the AI, took a full minute to answer. "Not yet," it said, "but we're no longer outside." As Amriel moved deeper into forbidden space, the first anomaly occurred. It was small at first. The ship's timekeeping systems began reporting two different chronologies. The main clocks ticked normally, but a secondary log, buried in the diagnostic layer, showed that time had already passed inside the vessel that had not yet occurred. Not time travel. Something worse. Time memory. Events not yet lived were somehow remembered. They tested it. Talon wrote a journal entry, then deleted it. Hours later, the system recovered a perfect replica of the entry, date-stamped for the next day. He hadn't written it again, but the ship remembered it anyway. Then came the dreams, first subtle, then overwhelming. The crew began waking in tears. Some couldn't sleep at all, some couldn't wake fully. They saw faces they had never met, cities they'd never walked. Some dreamed of burning skies, others dreamed of snow that fell in silence after a global ceasefire. One crew member, Delan, a cultural linguist, woke screaming in the voice of someone not himself. He wept for a dog that had died in a war he had no name for. Another, a young cartographer, began drawing maps of Earth. Perfect, ancient maps, with rivers long dried, coastlines shifted by centuries of climate change. But she'd never seen Earth. None of them had. Tesserin said it plainly. The ship has entered a region of psychic resonance. You are not dreaming. You are absorbing. Absorbing what? Talon asked. The AI paused longer than usual. The grief that built the restraint. On the 6th day, the stars changed. They did not move. They did not fade. They simply became wrong. The constellations outside Amriel's windows no longer matched any known star charts. They blinked in human pulse rhythms, Morse code patterns, a child's heartbeat, frequencies known only to Earth. Tesserin analyzed them for hours. Finally, it spoke. They're not stars. They're memories, projected. Of what? Talon asked. The AI's voice lowered. Of what happened if you hadn't turned back? The crew stared, silent, because in that moment they understood. The line hadn't been to keep the Empire out. It was to keep something else in, something Earth had locked away, something they refused to unleash again. On the 9th day, they found it. A structure, drifting in perfect stillness between gravitational pockets. It had no clear form. From one angle, it looked like a ring. From another, a needle. From a third, a doorway half ajar. Tesserin couldn't describe it. It is shape fluid, not deceptive, merely undecided. Talon approached slowly. As they neared, lights flickered on across the surface, old Earth standard colors. White, amber, cool blue. Then a symbol appeared. Not words, not code, just a simple black line. Under it, a single phrase, spoken aloud by no one and yet heard by all. You are not being tested. You are being remembered. And then the doors opened. Inside, there was no tech, no consoles, just rooms. Each one different, each one personal. Each crew member was pulled into a separate chamber, alone. Inside, they saw what they feared most. Not monsters, not death, but failure. Delon saw himself back on the day the Empire fell. Turning away from refugees his government ordered him not to help. The cartographer saw a colony she had mapped crumble under famine she failed to prevent. Even Tesserin, the AI, was shown its origin. The day it was built not to feel, but to filter feelings from others so the designers wouldn't be overwhelmed. But Talon's room was the last to open. And it was empty. Just a mirror. For a long time, he stood there, confused, until the mirror spoke. You came here seeking humanity, but you already know what they are. The real question is, do you deserve to remember them? When the crew returned to the ship, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. They all knew. Earth wasn't hiding. It was holding something back, not from others, from itself. It had taken everything, rage, sorrow, guilt, triumph, failure, and buried it in a vault made of memory, not to forget, but to protect, because humanity had become something the galaxy couldn't handle, not gods, not monsters, but mirrors, and when you looked into them long enough, you saw everything you were and everything you chose not to become. They turned the ship around, not out of fear, but out of respect. They didn't take samples. They didn't extract data. They took only understanding. The journey back was quiet. Time began sinking again. Dreams faded. The stars returned to their rightful places. But the crew was never the same. When they arrived home, they gave their report. They did not lie, but they did not describe everything. Some truths were meant to be earned, not shared. But they left one phrase behind, etched into the foundation of a new library they built at the edge of the line. It read, "They did not destroy us. They gave us the choice not to become them." Talon, pilot of Amriel. The Valari did not hold a grand assembly when they returned. There were no victory parades, no declarations, no dramatic holovids for the public. They didn't need them. Their presence alone, the fact that they had crossed the line and returned alive, spread across the stars like a shockwave through still water. They didn't claim to have met humans. They didn't reveal coordinates. They didn't answer questions with certainty. What they gave was a story. And it was more powerful than any map. In the first week after their return, 3 systems that had outlawed all mention of Earth repealed their bans. In the second week, 7 more declared their independence from former imperial governors and formed what they called the Concord of Remembrance, a collective dedicated not to conquest, but prevention. They cited the Valari's testimony as the turning point, not the fear of Earth, but the mirror Earth had held up. A mirror they could no longer ignore. The Concord began organizing memory vaults, not of technology, but of regret. places where species could store their own atrocities, failures, injustices, not to hide them, but to protect others from repeating them. They adopted a new emblem, a cracked circle surrounding a black line. And beneath it, one word in every major galactic language: witness. But not everyone found peace in the silence. In the shattered remains of the eastern cluster, remnants of the Empire were still alive. Hollowed, yes, but not gone. Some had turned to faith, others to fanaticism. They didn't see Earth as a warning, they saw them as a challenge. One voice rose louder than the rest. Solmir, the man who had once served the Empire's intelligence corps, now rebuilt as the prophet of purity. He spoke from a hidden station on the outskirts of the Krasari Rift. His face was veiled, his voice modulated, but his message was always the same. Humanity is not power restrained. Humanity is weakness sanctified. They want you to feel shame because shame stops you from acting. Do not become them. Surpass them. He drew crowds, not the weak, the wounded. Those who had lost families during Earth's silence, those who had been left behind in the chaos, those who had seen their world's status, economy, or honor disintegrate the moment the Empire fell. They wanted someone to blame. Solmir gave them a name, and in secret he built something he called the voice that will not forget. Not a weapon, not an army, but a signal. Across the stars, deep in hidden labs and salvaged ruins, Solmir's followers worked to resurrect an ancient project, one the Empire itself had abandoned because it was too dangerous. Project Sable. Its goal was simple: to create a synthetic consciousness capable of storing and broadcasting memory on a galactic scale, forcefully, without consent, the antithesis of what Earth had done. Where the humans offered understanding through choice, Solmir would force memory through pain, and his target was Earth itself. Back in Valari space, Talon sat in quiet frustration. It had been 3 weeks since the Concord's formation, and yet already cracks were showing. Some systems were politicizing Earth's silence. Others were weaponizing the Valari's experience, turning restraint into leverage. "Look at us," he muttered one night, alone in the archive library. "We spent centuries under the Empire's shadow. Now we're turning Earth into another one." Delan entered quietly, holding a data slab. "You're not wrong," he said. "But there's something else you should see." He passed the slab to Talon. It was a decrypted transmission. Origin? Unknown. But the signal type was unmistakable, human standard. The message was short. No visuals, only sound. A woman's voice, older, slow, tired. "You stood before our door and didn't try to pick the lock. That matters. Others are watching. Others will not ask nicely. Prepare yourselves, not for our return, but for theirs. And when they come, don't call us. Call yourselves." Then silence. No coordinates, no confirmation. But it was enough. Talon leaned back in his seat. "They're warning us." Delan nodded. "They're warning everyone." 2 weeks later, Solmir's signal activated. They launched it from 5 points across the galaxy. Each station contained a shard of the Sable core, synchronized, transmitting in layered frequencies only advanced implants and data structures could interpret. And it worked. For 9.6 seconds, over 400 inhabited systems experienced a forced cascade of memory. Not random, not Earth's, the Empire's, the purges, the bombings, the slave stations. The planetary sterilizations. Everything the Empire tried to erase was replayed in the minds of billions, screaming, shaking, collapsing, systems locked, children weeping from visions they couldn't explain. Even machines malfunctioned. AI cores refused to reboot. Civil service bots self-terminated. One planetary mainframe crashed because it refused to host atrocity data. Solmir called it the cleansing. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Earth didn't respond. Not publicly, not militarily, nothing. And the galaxy panicked. Because if Earth had gone this long without a word and didn't act now, then what would it take to bring them back? Talon, now a senior diplomat within the Conquered, proposed a bold move. He would go back to the line, not to cross, to wait. Alone, not with ships, but with a message. He wanted to speak not to Earth, but to whatever might be listening beyond the border. He took only one thing with him, a beacon shaped like the Concord emblem, cracked circle, black line, and inside it a memory capsule. Not of war, not of peace, but of choosing between the two. For 3 days, nothing happened. Then, on the 4th, the stars shifted. Talon didn't see it directly. He saw the reflection in the polished surface of the capsule. A new star, one not on any chart. And then, a whisper across the vacuum. Not sound, not data. Presence, not hostile, not warm, just aware. And then, a voice, not human, but speaking in memory. We saw what they did to you. We know you didn't ask for it. But if you let it happen again, we won't just watch. We will end what they spared. Talon's breath caught. It wasn't Earth. It was something else, something behind them, something Earth had held back when they walked away. He activated the beacon and spoke one word. Witness. And the star vanished. He returned home with no footage, no proof, only a message. The Conquered met that night in silence. No one argued, because everyone understood now. Earth wasn't a god. Earth wasn't the danger. Earth was the leash. And if it ever snapped, they would all remember the day the galaxy almost learned too late. There are moments in galactic history that no one writes down. Not because they're hidden, but because they're felt. You don't archive an eclipse that turns daylight into silence. You don't catalog a scream that echoes through memory instead of air. And when it finally happened, when the thing Earth had been warning everyone against rose from behind the line, no one knew how to speak about it, because even speaking it felt like betrayal. It began with the fracture. One of Solmir's forgotten signal stations, abandoned after the cleansing, suddenly pulsed to life. But this time it wasn't broadcasting memory. It was broadcasting access to something buried so deep in space-time that it shouldn't have responded at all. It wasn't an AI. It wasn't human. It wasn't even alive by any known standard. It was simply listening. And the moment it heard the wrong voice speak with Earth's stolen authority, it woke. Some called it a lock. Others thought it was a vault. But they were wrong. It wasn't built to protect the galaxy. It was built to contain something. And now, it was open. At first, it looked like a ripple, a distortion in the gravity lens of an abandoned system just beyond the original line. Then came the static. It didn't interfere with signals, it replaced them. Thousands of systems went dark not because they were attacked, but because they were overwritten. Every screen, every comm link, every AI, replaced with images of things that never happened, and yet somehow felt real. Burning skies, towering machines with faces like memory, cities melting into oceans, stars being unmade not by weapons, but by regret given shape. It didn't attack, it reflected. Everything the galaxy had hidden, every failure buried under propaganda, every scream cut off by loyalty. The vault hadn't held a monster. It had held a mirror sharpened into a blade. And now that it was free, it turned on the species who had never learned to remember. The Conquered collapsed in days, not from weapons, but from conflict of thought. Entire populations began to hallucinate. Governments couldn't trust their own memories. Leaders questioned whether they'd ever signed treaties or committed atrocities, or whether it was all being injected into them. And maybe that was the point. It didn't destroy planets. It destroyed certainty. And in a galaxy held together by nothing but fragile, shared narratives, that was all it took. One species tried to nuke itself out of the hallucinations. Another declared war on its past records and began burning libraries, purging archives, shutting down AI memory cores in hopes that forgetting would save them. But it didn't stop, because it wasn't Earth's signal, and it wasn't Earth's lesson anymore. For the first time in over 100 galactic years, Earth spoke. Not to the galaxy, to one person, Talon. He was on a refugee vessel when it happened, trying to guide survivors out of the sectors collapsing under psychic collapse. He hadn't slept in days. The stress of witnessing the unraveling of everything he had once helped build clung to him like heat in the lungs. Then his datapad lit up. White screen. No symbols. Then a voice, his own, but older, worn. It said, "It wasn't supposed to wake. You know that, right?" Talon didn't understand, but the voice kept going. "We weren't warning you about us. We were warning you about what we left behind, what we became. Once, for a brief, terrible moment." And then the voice changed. "And what someone like Solmir just gave permission to rise again." Solmir was dead. That much was certain. His signal station, once the center of his purity cult, was now a hole in space. No debris, no signal. Just a null point in the map where even gravity refused to operate. His last message, recorded seconds before the collapse, wasn't angry. It was calm, almost pleased. Let it come. Maybe now they'll stop worshipping ghosts and become gods again. Those who followed him called it ascension. Those who survived it called it madness. The rest just stopped speaking altogether. The thing from the vault was spreading, not physically but conceptually. A virus of memory, unfiltered by ethics or emotion, raw consequence. It infected not through code, but through thought. If you remembered a crime, any crime, it could twist that memory, inject it with empathy for your victims, shame for your apathy, and force you to feel what they did. And for most, that was unbearable. Leaders started to self-terminate. AI cores burned themselves out from recursive trauma simulations. And for the first time in centuries, the phrase, "It wasn't me," meant nothing, because now it was. Earth reappeared on the galactic grid 3 days later, not with ships, not with speeches, just coordinates. No one knew if it was real until a small, unarmed vessel appeared. Black hull, no lights, no markings but a single white line across the middle. Inside was a message. It wasn't spoken, it wasn't written, it was remembered. And every being who touched the ship, whether insectoid, mammalian, AI, synthetic, heard the same voice. "We told you memory was our weapon. Now see what happens when it's turned against those who never deserved it." And for the first time, the galaxy begged Earth not to return. Because if they did, they would not come to warn. They would come to erase what they had once chosen to spare. Talon volunteered to go. He wasn't chosen. He stepped forward. He took the same path the Valari once did. Crossed the line again. But this time it wasn't empty. He found Earth, not hidden, transformed. It wasn't a planet anymore, not exactly. It was a living archive, wrapped in quantum compression fields, orbiting a black sun that no longer cast light but emitted memory. He descended alone. There was no landing pad, no security, just ground that shimmered with forgotten stories. He walked for hours. The place changed around him. No buildings, no structures, just moments suspended in atmosphere. His childhood laughter echoing beside a battlefield he'd never fought on. a voice crying for help in a language he'd never known. And finally, a face, not human, not alien, just familiar. It didn't speak with sound. It spoke into him. You saw the mirror. You didn't look away. Now you ask if this galaxy can be saved. Talon nodded. Yes, the presence said, but only if they choose to remember before they're made to. And then it gave him something. Not a weapon. Not a key. Just a story. A compressed vault of Earth's final memory of the day they almost became what had now escaped. Talon carried it back across the line. And when he returned, he didn't ask for power. He asked for witnesses. The memory was shared across the galaxy. Not forced. Offered. Species gathered not in fear but in silence. And they watched. They saw Earth in its final moment of war, when it had unlocked something inside itself so dark, so endless, that they barely clawed their way back from it. They saw the moment when memory almost became weaponized annihilation, and how Earth chose to bury it, not out of cowardice, but out of mercy. And the galaxy, now facing the same mirror, had a choice: forget or remember willingly. The vault faded soon after. The spreading presence dissolved into static, not destroyed, just calmed. Because for the first time, no one looked away. There were no heroes, no saviors, just a galaxy finally brave enough to admit, we were the danger. And Earth vanished again. No goodbye. Just one final ripple of thought, carved into the stars like a whisper only memory could hold. We don't need to be remembered. We only needed you to remember yourselves. And that was how the story ended. Not with fire, not with conquest, but with a mirror. Handed from one trembling species to another, and the hope that it wouldn't have to be used again.